all going to learn what is all about industrial policy, agricultural marketing, and new economic policy. So let's begin with an introduction. What is all about the industrial development? Industrial development is mainly focused to achieve the economic growth and development and how they improvised the lives of its own people. And India has left no stone unturned to improve the life of the people, to you can say strengthened the industrial development and growth after independence in 1947. So when we talk about after the independence, there are various resolutions, acts has been introduced for the growth of the industrial sector in terms of development in both as an entrepreneur and authority. So when it comes to the framework and the better implementation of such industrial policies, a various act has to be amended. That is the Amendment of Industries Development and Regulation Act 1951, which is also referred to a IDR Act, and there are various regulation act. We can talk about the new industrial policy of 1991, and these particular acts has been regulated by the union government, who always mainly engaged into a direct investment in various preferred areas of industrial activities, and it could be done through the proper or a legal mechanism of in the way of licensing and keeping you can say the growth and development, and its objective is to be attainable level. So this is how the industrial development has been aimed, how we turn up into a growth and development after independence, what would be the policies has to be, a resolution of 1948 has been outlined and defined, and accordingly the acts has been regulated, and once the acts has been regulated, and who will regulate such acts, that is union government, and how this union government work for it, always preferred areas to be engaged into it, and through the way of licensing, and how the objectives at terms of national levels to be attained for. So this is all about the industrial development. Now we talk about the stages of industrial policy beyond to 1991. There are three main stages. The first one is industrial policy and strategy. Second one is industrial licensing. And the third one is phase of liberalization. So let's begin with the first stage, that is industrial policy and strategy. So when we talk about industrial policy and strategy, from the time of second 5-year plans, there is an industrial growth strategies has been adopted, and such strategy was totally based on the industrial policy resolution of 1956, just after the independence. So when we talk about this resolution is mainly called for economic constitution of India, which automatically mainly focused to develop a cottage and small scale industry and just establish a base for such industry and just focus on their growth. And on that, when we focus on the aim of focus and development and its growth, a classification has been made on these particular industries into different groups. So while we talk about the private and public sector at the same time, in terms of industrialization in India. And when we talk about the industries which has been you can say classified into different groups or schedule, that is Schedule A, Schedule B, and Schedule C. So when we talk about Schedule A, totally depends. There are only 7 new industries has been set up by the state, where the permission has been already been given or has already been granted to them, to that seven new industry. That is Schedule A. Schedule B, we are talking about the private sector industries where 12 in number is to be set up with the aim to implement the efforts of the state. It mainly focused on the cottage and small scale industries to their growth and development in that particular states. When we talk about Schedule C, it always talk about the developmental initiative, which totally depends upon and totally you can say left entirely to the private sector. And private sectors is the only way that how they will put on a developmental initiative which is totally accept for the 29 above. So there are seven new industries, 12 in number private, seven to be government, so it would be total 29, except these 29 in numbers. The other schedule, the other industries which is being to be set up, that comes under the Schedule C, which is totally depends upon or regulated by the, you can say, private sector. So this is all about the industrial policy and strategy. Now, the next one, a second stage is industrial licensing. It's always formed as a backstone of the state policy. So, always, whenever a new company or a new industry unit is to be opened up, especially in terms of the manufacturing of any goods which where the permission letter is to be needed to open up or to run such manufacturing activities in that particular stage or put in a place, that means that they require permission letter, they require a license for that from the central government. And when any industrial unit or who are engaged in the manufacturing of units, you can say in the output into a particular place or state, that actually called the industrial licensing. So accordingly, the license allotted to the manufacturing unit basically, you can say any site of the, depending upon or looking at the various factors like site of the plant, the merchandise or a large, you can say warehouses to be manufactured, a period within which an industrial capacities to be established. But depending upon these parameters, and if everything is to be according to the you can say limits or regulate based on the rules and regulation, then accordingly the license to be allotted to that manufacturing unit. So there is always a legislative framework is always be for the industrial licensing, which has been represented in different three different acts. So the first act is Industry Development and Regulation Act 1951. So this act is totally depends upon all those industrial units who have obtained a compulsory certificate of the registration, and if any new industrial units is to be opened up as to be recognized as industrial unit, it could be recognized as industrial units after obtaining a license from the central government, and that is called license, industrial licensing under this act. The next act is Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969. It's called MRTP. The primary role of this act is to control and curtail the whatever the concentration of economic influences or discourage monopolies. As monopolies, we always talk about the one company, we always talk about the one organization, and this act is always to impose or discourage that monopolies. So it always imposed the restrictions on the acquisition or the transfer of shares, then how the corporate bodies and how they control the monopolistic trade practices or restrict the unfair trade practices. That is the main focus or the role of such acts. So it always discouraged the monopolies or if any unfair trade practices is to be involved, this act is always restrict that practices. Another primary objective of this act is to control the monopolistic trade practices by promoting a healthy or soundful competition in a particular market. So that is the one of the primary objective of such act. Next one is Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, that is FARA, that is 1973. This act is always aims to acquire the foreign exchange or holding a foreign exchange in any form. This particular act is an extension of the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act of 1947. This act has empowered the Reserve Bank of India and how the central government is to ensure that the foreign exchange earned by export and it should be properly accounted for. That is, the act is always aims for that whatever the earnings is to be done through the foreign exchange, that should be accounted as true and fair whenever it's required for. That is the called the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act 1973. The next and third stage of you can say industrial policy is a phase of liberalization. When we talk about the phases of liberalization, when we talk about the phases of liberalization, we are talking about the 4 decades after independence. So there is an industrial, it always an industrial sector will always seems to have drastic changes. And for that changes, there are various industrial policies has been initiated and its approaches has been built up is mainly to secure and save or protect the Indian industries during the initial stages of development and economic fluctuation, as there is a fluctuation of inflation, deflation, or any of the price instability, that how when it comes to the liberalization, it's protect that these particular fluctuations, you can see, to protect the Indian industry. But this approach did not allow the industry to expand and adapt. And of course, when we talk about the phases, there are phases. This during a particular period of time, this approach will not be adopted. It will not allow any industry to expand and adopt. That means the concept of the liberalization will not be adopted or allow any industry to expand and adopt the concept of the liberalization when it comes to the development, when it comes to the safeguard and protection of the Indian industry. Now we talk about the next concept, that is New Industrial Policy 1991. Basically, this policy has been introduced mainly is mainly introduced to focus on the significant roles of private, public, joint, or cooperative sectors. So with the introduction of such policy, there is a significant roles of such sectors where we focus, where such policy is mainly engaged towards the government vision based on the industrial establishment, their functioning, their progress, their management policies, their expense management, and such policy is designed to create a high level of industries in the country, which mainly focused on high productivity, you can say a high level of employment rate, foreign investments, and how the diversities is to be engaged into an ownership. And that is called New Industrial Policy of 1991, where all such sectors, private, public, joint, and cooperative, are combined together to achieve the government vision towards such Indian industries to establish such industries, they are to work on their functioning, progress, and of course the management in terms of various parameters, whether it's related to production, its cost, or expense, and of course the whole finance management. So accordingly, we designed to create plenty numbers or a high level of industries where the Indian economy would easily develop. Let's talk about the objectives of new industrial policy 1991. So first objective is to relieve the country from regulations like license and control. That means it always make the country free, make the company regular for regulations like licensing and control. It always provides a support to the small scale sector, because when we talk about the new industrial policy 1991, it always the all type of sectors, whether it would be public, private, cooperative, are all combined together and come together and focus on the development of the Indian industry. So automatically small scale sector is also a part of the private and public, and always such policy provide a support to such sector. It always increase the competitive culture among the industry so that the public will get an options to choose which industries best at a large scale. The next one is providing more incentives to the backward areas and their local people. It is very important to understand that when it comes with the conceptual framework of this policy 1991, it also provides the plenty of incentives to the backward areas, to the semi-rural areas and their local people as well who are working in these particular industries. The next one is industrial development could always is automatically you can see developed within the developing countries, and it easily cope up with the different you can see developing countries as well. The next one is in order to liberalize the economy from varied government restrictions, and automatically it all new industrial policies always helps any economy, it would be Indian economy, it would be foreign economy, to liberalize from various government restrictions or regulations. They can work fairly from such restrictions like licensing and other tariff control as well. To liberate, it also liberate the private sector, that they can work independently where the government interference is no more. The next one is to ensure the increment in export and liberalize import. Automatically, the new industrial policy is mainly being developed, and the growth could be achieved when there is an increase in export, and how they will liberalize the imports and just make the imports free from the licensing and the tariff control or custom duties as well. The next one is it always increase the employment opportunities as well, and of course it liberalize the economy too from the various restrictions or the regulations which has been imposed unnecessarily by the government. So when there is a regulations, and where the country is free from such regulations like licensing and tariff control and custom duties, if any on an exceptional cases, that is the ultimate objectives of the new industrial policy of 1991. Next one is reasons to implement this policy. What would be the reasons why such policies to be implemented in a country? These are implemented to the industries. These are the reasons. Localization policy. After this policy, if any industry wants to to implement or to introduce any industry in a city or in a state, it should be less than the 1 million population, then a permission letter is required. As there are rules and regulation when it comes to an implementation of any plan in a city where the population is around less than 1 million, then automatically there is a permission letter required from the government. So for the cities who are having a population of more than 1 million, then of course the other than if the permission letter is required, other than the pollution free industries that they are supposed to establish their plants. So any industry which is pollution free and which is, you can say, 25 kilometers away from the city, then the permission letter is not at all required if they are pollution free. So it depends upon the localization policy, depends upon city to city, that in this city where the rules are actually required and where our permission letter is required or where it's not. The next one is liberalization policy. This policy is exempted all the industries except 18 industries where the licensing procedures and of course the regulation system is to be adopted. So those exceptional in the 18 industries includes army defense products industries and forest conservation, goods manufacturing industries, etc. So this is the liberalization policy, the except 18 industries where the no where such liberalization policy is actually not accepted, and except 18 industries, if there are any other industries involved in this in any of the country, then of course there's no restriction, no licensings to be required. The next one is foreign investment. This policy has a various provisions when any countries is in favor of doing any foreign investment, and its main purpose to provide to invest up to 51% by foreign companies in the equity shares. So if any foreign companies engaged into in India, then they have to invest 51% in an equity share so that they can come up to any other country to open up the industry and work in that particular country. So this movement and this vision of the Indian government is always helped to increase the flow of foreign capital into an Indian markets, and of course for the main or special focus to develop and growth of the economy, that is Indian economy. Next one is role of public sector, and of course, as the new industrial policy is a combination of the private, public, and cooperative sectors, then automatically the you can say public sector is a backbone of this such policy, and which are always occurs into a downfall or it will be a growth. So it depends upon situation or circumstances. So if any of the public sectors are not working well, so they can work to improve, they can then accordingly they can rebuild or reconstitute it. So there are various public sectors who are actually facing up the regular financial crisis, and of course they are always under observation of Board of Industrial Financial Reconstruction or any other central government organization who can rethink to improve and reconstitute it so that such sectors will not be demolished soon. The next one is workers' participation in management. This policy is always work on a friendly environment, and of course they will empower the life of the workers so that whoever they are working, wherever they are working in any of the industrial units, and it of course this particular step is always being done in order to manage the sick units. The next one is foreign technology. So with the improvement of the foreign investment or foreign imports, these policies always have a very positive influence when it comes to attract the foreign technology. So there is no not permission is required when there is import of foreign tech machines in which up to a 1 crore rupees. So if there is any foreign technologies to be used or import, then up to a 1 crore, no permission is required. If it is more than 1 crore, a pure permission letter is required from the central government. So Indian companies always well aware about such rules when it comes to adopt or adapt the foreign technologies or import the foreign technologies into their companies. So Indian companies are actually free to bargain and negotiate on their own terms without any permission from any of the government of India. So when it comes to the limits, finance limits, it should be 1 crore rupees if it is beyond the permission required from the government of India. There are state policies also adopted. So there are the policies, the regulations has been implemented in the various states. It could be Andhra Pradesh, it would be the Pondicherry, it would be the Uttar Pradesh. So these are the, you can say, where the particular policies has been implemented or related to industries. So when we talk about the Andhra Pradesh, a single window system is set up within 21 days. When the spot admission has always been done under professional taxes or any registration of shop establishment, any incentive of subsidies of GST or stamp duty. There is always a simplified process in land allotment and labor laws, any setup of skill development centers in Karnataka, any registration or approval of 10 departments, any commercial tax related queries, online information centers has been opened up in these industrial areas. Timeline has always been fixed so that to provide the best industry related services. Same in the Pondicherry, single window applications to be meant as to be developed online. Interest subsidy, power cost would be the fixed. There is no changes and depends upon the where whatever the you can say kilowatts of energy has been used. In case of Tamil Nadu, there are single bridge window facilities to be done for the pre-project clearance, employment incentive subsidies to be provided, environmental tax reform has been developed, and of course, skill development programs in Tamil Nadu has been introduced. So, and wherever there is another states, accordingly, the policies has been implemented. Now we talk about the other important policy which mainly focus on the industrial promotion, that how the industrial units, how the industrial sectors to be promoted. So there are two main policies. The first one is competition policy. Of course, there is an emerging need to promote competition when there is an international development, when the foreign companies are actually open up the industrial units in any of the countries. So there is a necessity to implement or to promote the competition, a comprehensive design, any high level of thinking or policy structure is in place. So, under the chairmanship of Shri SVS Raghavan, the government of India, they have set up a 9 members committee in October 1999 just to recommend or to work upon the judicial and administrative frameworks. And according to the recommendation of expert committee, there is a Competition Act 2003 has been implemented, and in as the MRTP Act has been replaced and a new act has been introduced, that is called the Competition Act 2023. This act is mainly focused to support and promote the competition and just restrict the anti-competitive practices which has been adopted by the various sectors or by the various industries in any particular country. So this competition policy is also being introduced in the form of Competition Act 2003. The next and last of the other important policy, that is the Special Economic Zone Act 2006. This zone or this act is actually focused to develop a specific areas which to promote the manufacturing and export of various products and services. It could be any type of components, raw material, spare parts, and accordingly the taxes to be imposed or restrict or exempted. That is all about in this act involved. The main incentive or the main benefit of such act is while any company or in any particular state or you can say city, this particular act will be adopted, and the advantage of such act would be a duty-free import of capital goods. So there is no duties is to be imposed on capital goods, raw material, consumable, and spare if any of the imports come to India. Tax exemption on export profits for the first 5 years. For the first 5 years, there is no tax to be imposed. There is no minimum alteration tax. If any goods purchased from domestic tariff area, then of course they are always exempted from the sales and service tax. There is no stamp duty, no registration fees, no electricity duty. When there is a exemption, you can say domestic tariff area is involved in it. No tax on income from dividend or any long-term capital gain tax as well. 100% foreign direct investment is allowed for any of the developers who develop in industrial areas, and 100% foreign direct investment is allowed for such developers. So this is all about the Special Economic Zone Act 2026. Next concept, one of the most important concept is agricultural marketing. So when we talk about agriculture marketing, is divided into two concepts, the agriculture and marketing. Agriculture is always included how to cultivate the crops, how to raise the livestock, where the marketing is all about, is all about activities which are related to move the goods from the production sites and reaches to the ultimate consumers. So when we combine these two words, it becomes the agricultural marketing, which refers to a process which are mainly involved in transporting the agricultural products from basically farm sites to consumers or to potential consumers. And within this process of moving up the goods from farm sites to consumer, it always includes a proper planning, organizing, directing how they handle the agricultural production so that they can meet up the needs of the farmers, the brokers, the intermediaries or market intermediaries and ultimate consumers. And that is when this process involved the planning, organizing, directing, and handling all type of activities so that the needs of the farmers could be fulfilled, and of course the needs of the market intermediaries and the consumers is to be fulfilled. And ultimately it refers to agricultural marketing, because agriculture marketing is mainly focused upon the needs of the farmers. It's not mainly focused upon to increase the sales. So that's why if automatically any marketing activities or the activities is related to the marketing is mainly focused on the needs of the farms, the needs of the farmers, the needs of the intermediaries or the consumer, that is simply called the agricultural marketing. Importance of agricultural marketing: there is an increase in the farm income when there is a when there is a more and more production of goods and services from farms to ultimate consumers, then ultimately the farm income will also get increased. That means meaning it always when there is a chances to increase the middlemen or brokers, then automatically when the income automatically increase through the farms, then it is very important to reduce the involvement of the middlemen, minimize the marketing cost and well practices, and ultimately leads to the increase in farmer income. Next one is expansion of market. When any company or any farming activity adopt a specific or efficient marketing system, it always expand the market for its own agricultural products. When it comes to the any rural areas or remote areas within the country or abroad, so effective marketing system is always being an effective tool when a particular farming company is always ready to expand the market for its agricultural products. So once the expansion of market would be there, it leads to sustained demand and higher income for all those producers who are involved in the marketing of agricultural products. The next one is price signals. So a good marketing system is always helps all those farmers who are actually plan their production based on the economic needs of the consumers by providing a price signal to them. Adoption of new technologies, the proper or efficient marketing system always maintain that how they will adopt a new technology by ensuring or assuring the farmers of that market access at a profitable prices, and how they encourage them to invest into a modern techniques so that they can accordingly adopt into their agriculture farming. So these are the one of the points of the importance of agricultural marketing. Next, it always generate the employment, or it creates employment opportunities for the various activities, like could be relate to the packaging, it could relate to the transportation, it could relate to the storage or any type of processing. And it always include why generate, because it always relate, such roles always relate to the commission agents, traders, retailers, workers who are mainly involved in logistic management, where supply chain management and its regulations. Of course, agriculture marketing contributes to national income, and automatically when it talks about the national income, marketing activities always adds value to the agricultural products. It always increase the country gross domestic product or net domestic national product when it comes to the import and export of agricultural products to different countries, or import from home country. The next one is improving quality of life. So an efficient marketing system always plays a very important role when any of the developmental programs would get succeed in improving the living standard of the people. And such developmental programs would be the poverty reduction, how the consumer food prices could be low, how to earn more and more foreign exchange earnings, how to reduce the economic fluctuation or inefficiencies, and accordingly, these all factors or parameters where all needs actually an effective agricultural marketing system only. So when a particular company applies an effective marketing system, then automatically these programs related to these programs, then of course it will improvise the overall living standard of the people, or improve the quality of life of the people. Now we talk about the next important concept, that is new economic policy of 1991. New economic policy of India, basically it's launched in the year 1991 under the leadership of PV Narasimha Rao. This policies always open up the doors for the Indian economy, that how the global exposure is to be introduced for the first time using of this policy. And through this new economic policy, the PV Narasimha Rao, where the government has reduced the import duties, opened up the reserve sectors for the private players, how they devalued the Indian currency so that the export could be increased. And when these process and when the government took actions when to reduce the export import duties, open up the reserve area for the private players, decrease the Indian currencies to increase the export, then that these particular factors where the Rao government has actually took that this is actually called the LPG model of growth, where L stands for liberalization, P stands for privatization, and G stands for globalization, where they open up a doors to the global players, they open up a doors for the private players, for the reserve sectors, they increase the value of a rupee to increase the export, to improve the economic growth and development of the Indian country. That is exactly called the new economic policy of 1991. New economic policy is also called economic liberalization, how they will relax the limits to the import tariffs, how they degrade, how they deregulate the markets, how they open up the markets for the private and foreign players, how they reduce the taxes so that they can expand the economic, you can say, growth of the country, or you can see the economic status of the country. So accordingly, the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh is always considered the father of this policy called a new economic policy of India. And he's the one who have introduced this policy on July 24, 1991. Main objectives of new economic policy 1991 July 24. So basically, what are the main objectives of this policy? So they have clubbed the Indian economy into a globalization, and of course, they will open up a new areas in on market orientation. This always brings down the rate of inflation. When you talk about it leads to a higher, this policy leads to a higher economic growth rate, and of course it always sustain the foreign exchange reserves as well for the country. It always build up and stabilize the economic status of the country, and always convert the economy into a market economy where the more and more global and private players would get involved and remove all the unnecessary, you can see, unfair trade practices, or remove the unnecessary, or make them free unnecessary from unnecessary restrictions. It all such policies always want to permit the international flow of goods, services, capital, human resources, technology without any restrictions. Uh, the one of the main objective of new economic policy is to increase the participation of the private players in all the sectors of the Indian economy, and that's why the reserve numbers of sectors for the government were reduced, and it reduced from 11 to 2. So this is how the scope of the new economic policy has been improvised for the Indian economy. The main measures adopted in the new economic policy. So these are the few measures which have been adopted in such policy. First one is free determination of interest rate by the commercial bank. So under this policy makers or the framework, there is always a liberalization of interest rate in the banking system, which was not one decided or determined by the RBI. Rather than all commercial banks will always have an independency to determine that rate of interest. And it could be possible under the new economic policy. As at current scenario, the Reserve Bank of India, whatever the interest rate has been decided by the Reserve Bank of India, all the commercial bank has to follow that interest rate and charge accordingly to their clients or customers. But through this policy, the RBI is not, it's not a responsible person or to decide the rate of interest. In fact, all the commercial banks are totally independent to decide the rate of interest. So this is also one of the major adopted in the new economic policy. The next one is increase in the investment limit for the small scale industry. So the investment limit has been increased to 1 crore rupees. So those companies want to upgrade their machinery, improve their efficiency, just invest, take an investment limit of rupees 1 crore on these particular to upgrade your company or your industrial units. Next one is freedom to import capital goods. Through this policy, Indian industries will be free to buy machines and raw material from foreign countries as well, so that they can devote and adopt a holistic development or a global development in their own company, which ultimately improve the you can say growth of the economy. Next one is freedom for expansion and the production to industry. So when we talk about into the new liberalized era, or you can see the industries were very free to diversify their production capacity and how they reduce the cost of production. So through this policy, they are actually free to expand or production to industry. So there is no actually maximum limit of any production capacity under this policy. So no industry could produce beyond that limit. So now the industries are free to decide their production by their own way on the basis of the requirements of the market. So before, the government is used to fix the limit, but now there is no limit. Industry itself can decide the limit depending upon the requirements of the markets. The next one is abolition of restrictive trade practices. So according to the MRTP Act 1969, all those companies who has a net turnover of 100 crores and more are actually called the MRTP firms. And of course, they are subject to the plenty of restrictions. But now these same firms have not to obtain any approval of the government for taking up any investment decisions. And that's why they are free to take up an investment decision, just because the MRTP Act has been replaced to Competition Act 2002. So such act is not applicable, and that's why all the restrictions which has been imposed under this act has been removed, and now the new act has been introduced already, that is Competition Act 2002, where no government approval is required when it comes to the, you can say, investment decisions. So this is how the one of the, you can say, measures is to be adopted for the new economic policy. So the next concept is LPG model, as I told, liberalization, privatization, and the globalization. So when we talk about the liberalization, so liberalization is always refers to make them free from all the restrictions within the areas of social, economic, and political policies. So, liberalization in terms of economic policy, it always focused on how to reduce the government laws and restrictions so that the country economy could be improved, and how, and also to encourage the greater participation of the private players. That is exactly called the liberalization. There is another factor under the liberalization to remove the industrial licensing and registration. That previously the private sectors come forward and take a permission or obtain a license from the government to start up a new company or new venture in any of the country. But in this particular policy, new economic policy, private sector is free from licensing and the other restrictions as well, and that is called liberalization. There are industry licensing is actually necessary for all these industries where the chemicals and drugs has been used. The first one is liquors, cigarette, defense equipment, industrial exclusives, drugs, and hazardous chemicals. So these are the particular areas where the industrial licensing is actually mandatory and required, and take a license from the government, except these industries uh, uh, where no licensing is required for the private players when they start up a new venture. For example, any finance company would a new venture related to the finance, it come up to the India and by the foreign companies, and there is no permission is required or license is required from the government. But there is investment limit is always be there, so that to be fulfilled by the foreign company when they are planning to open up a new venture in India. Privatization. So when we talk about privatization, so privatization means just to invite, encourage, and promote the private sector to set up the industries which are mainly reserved for the public sectors. So under this policy, many public, you can see many public sector undertakings were sold or convert into the private sector. So privatization is also a process to include the private sector into ownership of public sector units or undertakings. Why? There is a main reason for privatization in the currencies, because most of the public sector under units are turned into a losses due to the political interference, and as a result the private players would come forward to take over that public sector companies which are who are running into a losses, and the managers who belong to the private sector unit, they work independently. So whatever the production capacity, it's remained underutilized automatically. So to increase such production units, to increase such competition, to then of course the public sector and units has to be turned up or convert into a privatization, which is actually an efficient decision and was inevitable. So that is the exact conceptual framework of the privatization, where the conversion of public into a private, and they always encourage the private players to set up the industries wherever possible, or previously which are previously reserved for the public sector as well. So this is how the privatization process worked, and what was the reason behind it, because of the running into a losses due to the political interference, and as a result the production will goes on or the capacity will remain underutilized. So to become a full utilization, to increase competition and efficiency, privatization of such public sector was inevitable in this particular privatization scenario. Steps taken for privatization. The first one is the sale of shares of public sector units. So India now the Indian government has start selling shares of the public uh, to public or financial institutions where the government where the government sold shares of Maruti Udyog Limited to the private sectors, and the share of the private sector now increased from 45 to 55%. So to convert from public to private, the sharing ratio would be 55% at least. The next one is disinvestment in, you can say, public sector units. The government had started the process of disinvestment. Those public sector units would turn into a losses, and accordingly, the government sold on such industries to the private sector, and the private players will come forward to take over all those enterprises and sold up to a 30,000 crores to the private sector. Minimization of public sector. So previously, public sectors always given up an importance to help the industrialization, to remove the poverty, but now these public sector enterprises could not able to achieve that objective, and the policy of the expansion of the public sector units, but now through the new economic policy reforms, these number of the public sector industries reserved for public sector was reduces from 17 to 2. So when and 72, and there are two only the public sector undertakings which has not been converted into a private companies, that is the railway operation and atomic energy. So now the public sector units is turned from 7, it's reduced from 70 to 2, and there are only two who have a public sector undertakings, that is the railway operation and atomic energy. The next concept is globalization. So globalization means where to make the global economy by taking up a follow considerable steps and just consider the one economy into a world economy. So when we talk about in broad sense, globalization means that how to interact the domestic economy with the rest of the world in the way of foreign investment, foreign trade, foreign production, and foreign direct investment. When these four parameters are involved together and they interact or connect with the domestic economy, then it turns into a globalization where the domestic economy would connect to the global economy or with the rest of the world in terms of foreign investment, foreign trade, production, and any of the financial resources or matters. That is called globalization. These are the steps taken for globalization. The first one is how to reduce the tariff rates. And of course, there are various custom duties, tariff imposed on import and export, are ultimately reduced through the process of globalization, make the Indian economy attractive to the global investors. So this is also the one of the steps to adopt a globalization where the Indian economy would be more attractive to the global investors. The next one is long-term trade policies. When we talk about the long-term trade policy, it always be for a longer period because the trade policy is related to the foreign trade where the foreign direct investment is involved, the foreign exchange reserves are involved, where the you can say the foreign trade policies are involved in it, and which always be a long period for through the process of the or through adopting the concept of globalization. So this is how the globalization works accordingly when and it always helps to reduce the tariff rates. It always implement the various trade policy for a long period. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening this lecture and namaste to all.